All right, we're fine. Hello, everyone. My name is Hope. I'm here with lovely Nakeya Brown. I have a wonderful chance to interview her. This is sponsored by Caldera magazine, where it gives voice to artists and queer artists of color. And so I'm a student at HWS as well, and I am also co-curating a show with Professor Angelique, Better Than Good, Black Hair and the Art of Nakeya Brown. It comes out March 6, 2021. So take a look out for that. It'll be at the Davis Gallery in Geneva, New York. And I'm gonna allow Nakeya to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time out to listen in on the conversation that I'm about to have with Hope. My name is Nakeya Brown, and I'm an artist that works primarily in photography. I'm based in Maryland, and my work that is going to be coming to HWS really centers around Black female subjectivity and the politics of Black beauty. And as a photographer, I'm really interested in thinking about ways to express our experiences as women, our experiences as Black women, but doing them in ways that don't necessarily center our bodies in the narrative, but thinking about how we can express ourselves beyond our bodies, and by looking at sort of the spaces we hold, the rituals and the traditions we keep, the objects and the different materials that circulate within our lives. And so I'm really excited to dive into this talk.
Okay, so I kind of want to jump right into your, I think it's a delicate knot photography for photographing Black girlhood and womanhood. You wrote this essay yourself, and after reading it, there was one quote of yours that you wrote that really stuck out to me, and there's two questions that you opened up with, and I'm just going to read it to you, and please respond to it in whatever way. I experienced over the years, how would I pass those memories on to my daughter? Which ones are worthy of our attention? And so can you basically, answer those questions? Because, I feel like family, and family and like, one is such a huge part of, and like just relations is such a huge part of like, hair and, the process and the narratives and the rituals that go into it. And so, and memories, come through that practice. So I guess I kind of like went a roundabout way, but can you please answer those two questions? And I guess like, how do you see your two daughters being a part of this memories as well?
Yeah, so the questions were, how would I pass
Yes, how would I pass
those on to my daughters?
Yeah, worthy of our
And yeah, so it was like really interesting moment, I think, after I became a parent, especially becoming a mother, because I was really, really reflective. So I was like thinking a lot about the past, but then I was also sort of thinking about the future and wanting a different future, right? For them, where in their future, they can, move about the world how they are naturally, and they can sort of make decisions to exist naturally, and that just be like without a second thought, or it just comes naturally to them. And I think just in my own experience, not really having any sort of encounter with like my natural hair or just like self-acceptance to a certain degree until I was like in my late 20s. I really had to take a moment to think about that and think about, well, what were some of the, what sort of influenced that, and what were some of the choices that had to be made, within my family, thinking about like the dynamics of our daily life, thinking about the dynamics of the societal expectations, thinking about all of those things that sort of shaped how I moved in the world as a young girl. And so I really had to ask myself those questions. And I said, well, I'm a creative, and I do remember like, my mom, she always sort of instilled this sense of like Black girl visibility in us as young kids. Like she would always, you know, try and get us like Black Barbie dolls, or like if we were reading books, she would always expose us to books where the main character was, you know, a Black girl, or just a Black protagonist. And so I was sort of like, well, I'm an artist, I'm a mom, like I do this thing where I'm producing culture, I'm making art, I'm sort of sharing my art and my photography. And I kind of made a decision that I need to be intentional and deliberate in what I'm making. And so I started having these values and started to like develop values around how I wanted my daughters to sort of think about standards of beauty, think about their own selves, think about their hair textures, thinking about their body type. But I think more so I just kind of centered around hair because I had gone through so many changes and experienced so much. It was such a rich place for me to pull from my own life. Mm-hmm. And I sort of said, well, I'm going to start to use my art to sort of have these dialogues that I have in my own head with myself. And I think that's how I sort of came about answering those questions, like how would I pass on some of these traditions to them? Well, you know, I'll sort of put it in my work, but then I'll also think about, well, what do I want different for them now? And how can I make that be sort of like the foundation for the work that I'm making?
That was really inspiring. Sorry, I'm just like writing down notes because I think it's like I just want to remember some of your ideas. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a great answer. It was like that. It was beautiful. And there was one thing that that you said, this foundation. You know, can you just explain like a little bit more of what you mean about this foundation? I just probably misheard you when you're saying it, or like it went over my head. But can you kind of go over what you mean by this like foundation that you're trying to leave and producing culture as well with your work?
Yeah, I think the root of my work really is around thinking about how, as women, we experience the world in very particular ways, especially as like young Black women, right? And so just like establishing a very clear sort of theme within my work where I'm interested in thinking about like when I came to making the work, there was like all these a lot that has happened before I'm actually producing the work. And so when I say foundation, I'm really sort of thinking about like at the root of everything, at the root of all the work, at the root of, you know, the different series, whether I'm doing still lifes or shooting portraits of women, or if I'm sort of looking at, you know, hair politics or looking at perm kits, like I'm sort of looking at or interpreting the right to think about who gets to set the tone for what's beautiful and what's not. And I think a lot of the foundation of what I'm doing sort of centers around, you know, Black womanhood and girlhood, and it sort of uses a lot of our shared experiences to sort of make something bigger that's sort of consumed and can be digested and taken in by lots of different Black women, whether they experienced it or not. And so I think just kind of going back foundational, I'm just really interested in like centering our stories around like my own sense of like creativity and image making.
Can I ask you another question? Because it was kind of making me, you know, was wondering, why do you use photography? And then I did a little bit more research, and, you know, from one of your interviews, the Dodge and Burn Decolonizing Photography in History, you said there was a level of truth and authenticity with photography. And, you know, I was kind of like wondering, you know, is there though? Like, I kind of want to push you a little bit, and maybe kind of like a little bit, maybe elaborate on this level, this idea of like level and authenticity. Authenticity. Those are, again, I'm taking those two words from, you know,
Yeah.
not a full idea, but those two words kind of, you know, stuck out to me because, you know, sometimes it depends on who's behind that lens, who's taking this photo, that can kind of really, you know, obscure that level of like truth and authenticity. And so, I mean, is that why, and this is, I'm also asking you another question too, is that why you only decide to talk about Black women? Like, why aren't you including like Black men practice in your work? Or are you thinking about doing that furthermore? Or, yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think about doing that furthermore. I'm really like committed, and I feel like there's so much more that I still haven't done within the work I'm doing now. I don't think I'm ready to kind of jump ship just yet. Um, but I did that. I don't even know how long ago I did that interview.
It was like early, I think it was like 2013.
Yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
I think that might have been like that was such a long interview, long ago. And so, I mean, as artists, right, like we do interviews, and so we're not stagnant
Yeah.
beings, right? Like we kind of put ideas out because that's what we're thinking of at the moment. And I think at the time, um, the work that was shown in that series was the reputation of good hair.
Yeah.
And I think I was sort of working in like a very traditional way in terms of like uh, working with portraiture and sort of like working with the body and sort of like having the women do like this sort of gesture of like consuming hair to kind of represent this larger issue that I had with like what standards of hair texture, like how that sort of impacts us when we have these different hierarchies when it comes to hair texture.
Mhm.
And so I think what I was trying to get at that time is that within photography, it's sort of like always a copy of reality to a certain extent. Like a photograph is appropriating something that exists physically in front of you in the space, right? And so I think when I was thinking about like kind of using the words of like truth and truthful and authentic, there's nothing truthful and authentic purely about photography. Like photography has been so problematic and manipulated in a way that has really harmed Black women and Black people, just historically if you look at it. But I think I was sort of thinking about it in terms of like, well, a photograph kind of appropriates something that you're looking at physically. So I was just sort of going from that perspective.
Yeah, and so I guess it's like to bring it to the present. Where are you at now with photography? Like using this as a medium, because your work has like the reputation
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
of excuse me, of Get Hair. You know, was one of your first works.
Yeah.
So you know, and but you've done multiple works now, and you recently just released one of your newest projects as well. I can't think of the name. I'm sorry. But you know, and your style and like even just like your use of you know different objects in the rituals of Black hair change. So I guess kind of going back to what I was saying earlier is you know like where has your relationship with photography left you now? Like where is it now?
Yeah, I think for now, photography, like I'm still figuring it out exactly, you know what I mean? Like I don't think my relationship to photography is ever gonna just be like a subtle fixed thing.
Mm-hmm.
I do think I'm interested in thinking about how photography allows me to think about sort of like color and how it allows me to think about like physical space, but then also um, how to create a space that is sort of metaphysically suggesting something else or leaning to like other ideas. So I always am really intentional in terms of like when I'm photographing or setting up a still life or looking for objects that kind of tie back to, you know, beauty, politics, and rituals, and not necessarily just thinking about like, oh, I'm photographing these black hair ads because like I purely want to look at the aesthetics of, you know, how Black women, you know, would present themselves in the world. But looking at these, you know, black hair ads, but then also adding another dimension to it, and sort of my research and my reading and like when I'm talking about the work, but also thinking about like my latest work, Expressions, Black Beauty Still Lifes, that has like all these different, it's like a, you ever heard of like potpourri, like those little scented candles that have like all these mishmash of like different scents and flavors and textures and colors and things like that. And so I kind of think of that as like, you know, my own type of like potpourri, like I kind of collect these things. But the items that I'm photographing are like cut out magazines, pages from like hair trade magazines. And so looking at the trade magazine as this sort of like production of Black women and sort of like a record of our work and our labor and thinking about like Black women's work and like how can we look at these different materials but then also analyze them and think about them as records of our production and our labor, as records of our experiences, as records of you know, our different ways that we move throughout the world and, you know, take care of ourselves and take care of others. And so I think for me, photography has sort of been a way to do that.
Yeah.
In a way that kind of makes those moments stay still for a little bit for you to be able to talk about them, if that makes any sense. So
yeah, that makes sense.
I'm still working out what my relationship to photography means and what it means to only make work centered around Black womanhood. Because I get those questions. I've gotten that question before, you know, like, well, what about, you know, Black men, or would you ever include Black men in it? And I just feel like, you know, I'm really interested, like as a Black woman and as a photographer, I feel like there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I kind of feel like if I kind of move out, that I'm no longer invested in the work that I originally felt compelled to work in this way to begin with. So
I think that was so, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off right there, but I think that was so powerful. And I think it's like, and you know, I guess I also want to apologize, I guess, for asking you that question then, because it's like, there was so much truth to what you just said right there. And it's like, I almost forgot, and I take for granted how much Black women are never really documented in history, you know? And it's like, and you're trying to do the work that we all need to be doing.
I mean, you know, I'm not necessarily trying, because I don't consider myself like, I'm not a documentary.
Oh, well,
yeah, photographer per se, but I do know where it's kind of like just, I always kind of think about like when, you know, when you look at the photo, like the photograph tells you one thing, but then the viewer tells you one thing, and then the artist tells you another thing. So there's just so much that could go into the act of looking at a photograph. And I guess I'm just kind of, I'm kind of playing around with that right now. Like in a way, that's something I've been really interested in doing. And
yeah, and I definitely think I see that. And I think like looking, you know, having a chance to kind of like look at your journey, and I'm still unpacking and noticing new things in your work every time I like go on your website, which really I feel like I want to see it in person. I mean, like I'm just so ready for it to come to the Davis Gallery, but but it's just like, you know, I think going back to what I was saying though, it's like just looking at your work, you know, it's such a roller coaster of emotion, and I don't feel that like, and I feel this energy of like what you've been describing to me in your work, all of this history, ever changing ideas, but like just the centering of like Black womanhood, Black girlhood, Black stories, and you know, and I think it's so, and it's like in a weird, and a part of the reason why I said you know, you're documenting, and I didn't like interpret your work as like you kind of going in from like a documentarian angle, but you know, I was once told from another artist in Philly, she told me that, you know, Black stories are, you know, rarely ever told or shared or brought to light, or never ever, you like, this is the first time in my 3 years at my school where a Black woman artist has been brought to the Davis Gallery. So I was literally like in tears. I literally, so it's like
Wait, are you saying the whole entire existence of Davis Gallery, you've never had a Black woman artist?
Well, I mean, they're in not in the history of like, there probably were Black artists. There definitely were Black artists, but like since I've been there, I just haven't like dedicated like no. Yeah, let me tell you, like there probably hasn't. I don't know too much about the Davis Gallery history, but like I just haven't seen a work just dedicated to Black women like this. Like you're like, this is like, and it's just like, it's totally like, it's like whoa. And so it's like in a good way, and so you know, and so I think you know, how I'm interpreting it as the viewer, you know, I am interpreting it as like, this is a chance for me and my cousins, my sisters, to see ourselves in a gallery, on white walls, on a space that typically I would never get a chance to see it, and to be honored and to be recognized. And so, and it's like, and you know, sometimes I feel so overwhelmed because I'm like, wow, this is like, this is, it's so new. Like, it's like, this is such a, it's like 21 years old, and I'm like, wow.
It's definitely, you'd be surprised, right, at how many of us haven't experienced this before. I mean,
but it's something so private as well, you know. Like, it's like, I'm sorry, I just want to ask you a question, because I gave you a lot, but I didn't really give you anything to respond with. So just in case, you know, I think what's beautiful about your work is, you know, you mentioned this idea of like rituals, traditions. And, you know, I feel like rituals and traditions have this kind of like mysticism behind it. You know, it's like, this is something so private, you know, like this, you know, I feel like you're bringing this like private space of like Black hair, and kind of, I don't want to say you're demystifying it, because I feel like there's still this mystery. There's definitely, you don't show it all. Like, I definitely don't feel like exposed. And, like, like, I feel like it's like, I know what they're doing. I don't know. But anyways, I realized I didn't have a question. It's more of just like my thoughts again. But please respond to them as it was a question, as if it was a question.
And it's interesting that you have mentioned that, because it was definitely particular in the series. I feel like most explicitly sort of puts the rituals, you know, out in front of an audience who maybe have never heard of it or never seen it before. Our hair stories untold, and like the sealing of the braids, or the like rollers with the grease, and like the weaves, like the tracks, and like showing what that physically actually looks like. But then it's in a way that sort of like it sort of goes beyond literal use of how we do these things, through like the act of like staging, and through like my color choices. And you can clearly tell that these are images that I've thought about and staged and captured and sort of directed. Like, they're not, you know, documentations of like someone actually doing those things. But I was thinking a lot about that, like Black girl magic, and sort of like how magic sort of has this this like obscure knowledge of information that not everyone has access to. And so I was sort of thinking about the agency in that, and like having that knowledge and the power it gives you, and sort of how the structure of who has the information and who doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
what that does for the experience when you're going into the gallery and looking at some of these things. And that doesn't go to say that every Black female that walks into the gallery and looks at my work will know what it's about. But you know, it at least for me, and sort of what I was interested in doing at the moment, thinking about sort of like who has access to the information about a photo before you go into it, and how does that pull you in, and how does that kind of like make the artist be aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was really interested in sort of like, how can I do that? I mean, you know, when you think about like art history and you're sort of looking at, you know, abstract paintings, right? And some people are like, what is going on here? Like, you know, like it's sort of that same effect that you get if you aren't really a part of, like, if you're not in the circle, like if you don't know, you don't know. And if you know, you know, like, and so there is that sort of, I was sort of playing with like, right? Like sort of like the politics of knowledge, like who knows what and who is a part of sort of what's happening in this image and what's happening in this space, as a way to be sort of like inclusive and centering Black women. I think that was something that I was interested in exploring.
Yeah.
The theories and the rituals and traditions.
Yeah. No, I think that's it's so powerful. And I think the one thing that stuck out for me was like this idea of like the politics of knowledge.
Yeah,
and you know, I guess this might be a kind of a weird question, but if you were like the viewer of your work, you know, taking like if you weren't the creator and you were kind of looking at it, you know, as a viewer, would you want to create it? Like, would you? I don't know how to word it. I'm sorry. Scratch that. Do you want to include other people who don't know? Like you mentioned this, like if you know, you don't know, but for those people who don't know, you know, what does your work mean for them, I guess?
I think it's just a way of making them aware of the fact that they don't know. And I don't necessarily, it's not a condemning, don't know. It's not like you should be ashamed of yourself because you don't know. It's like, well, what if you are not in close proximity to someone who does this regularly? How would you know?
Yeah.
But it is a little bit of like, knowledge is not like all, it's not something that everyone can monopolize. Like there's so much knowledge out there, and you know what experiences, and for at least for me, the knowledge that I'm kind of bringing to is like this knowledge of my own personal experiences and lives that might be shared to others. And so I think everyone brings knowledge wherever they are. Like artists are always making work that sometimes as a viewer we'll know, and sometimes as a viewer we won't know. And I think you know, as a maker and as the viewer, you're kind of always negotiating to what degree you are, you know, leaning more towards giving a lot of information, or just having to kind of do a little bit of work to understand someone else's, you know, perspective. And so I don't think that if you don't know the work, like there's this meme that's gone viral since like 2013 with my work, and it's like, if you don't know what this means, it's not for you. And it was with the woman, the Black girl with her braids, and she was feeling it, and it was like this meme, and it literally, I get tagged in it like every 3 days, and it's like 50,000 likes on like natural hair blog. And it's like, if you don't know what this is, it's not for you. And so, like, to a certain degree, it's really incredible to kind of see, like, I don't think that was like my intention as making the work. Like, if it's not, my work was more or less like, this is us, like, this is for us. And it wasn't more so like, this is not for you, but it was more like, hey, hey y'all, this is for us.
Yeah.
So I think it's,
yeah, I think that's so powerful.
You know, I kind of feel like that's where it was kind of coming from when I was making it. I wasn't really thinking like, well, some people aren't going to not know what this is. And my mind is kind of like, well, that's okay. You can have a conversation and learn. Like, there's nothing wrong with learning, right? And so, did I answer the question?
No, you definitely did. No, you definitely did. And what I took away from your question was that it's like, knowledge is like you said, knowledge can't be monopolized, and it's like it shouldn't be, and it's like you're creating an inclusive space. You're not like separate or segregate. You know, you already got enough of that going on.
Yeah,
like my work is not doing that.
You're not gonna tell me that's what it's doing. It's not doing that. But
yeah. So 2 more questions. That I will, and then we can close.
Okay.
And so one, I wanted to go back, is kind of focusing this question is focusing more on your artistic style, and you mentioned your color choices, and your work is like, I love your colors. It's always like, it's vibrant and packs your punch. You know, and you play with a lot of like blues and also like dark shades as well. But I always feel like what I take away from your work, just looking at it, it's always bright and welcoming. You know, it goes with that narrative of like being inclusive. And then you also mentioned this idea of like staging as well. And so I kind of wanted to ask you, you know, your artistic approach, which you kind of highlighted as well, but just to kind of expand on it a little bit more. You know, from your color choices to you know positioning and portraitures, and if there's something else that I didn't catch on, but I guess some of the color choices in your, you know, just your staging and choices of items.
I well, it all sort of came out after I tell you, whenever people ask me questions, I always go back, like, it all started in motherhood. Like, everything started there. Like,
I love it.
I mean, really, it was like I was born again as an artist. And so at the time when I started working, the Refutation of Good Hair was like the first series that I made where I was kind of like, I want to be intentional with how I'm using these different elements in art. Like, let's just start from the basic, like color. And so I was like spending a lot of time on like Tumblr around that time. So I do feel like there's a lot of Tumblr aesthetics in like some of my earlier choices, and sort of like looking at sort of how people were curating their pages and looking at how different ideas and concerns like within Tumblr and stuff had like these different aesthetics. And so I do think that in the age of the internet, I was like looking a lot at the internet. Also at the same time, around that time, I was also a photo rep. So I was working as a junior rep for photographers. And so in my 9 to 5 during the day, I was looking at photography like 10 hours a day. And there was just really great photography. Like, I was looking at like still life photographers and lifestyle photographers, portrait photographers. So I spent for like a good 4 years, 8 hours a day, just looking at photography and working with photographers. And so I think that definitely sort of influenced, like, all right, well, when I'm starting to make my work, like, how do I want it to be produced? And like, how do I go about doing that? And so because I think I was really interested in thinking about femininity and softness in relationship to hair texture and sort of like these ideologies, naturally I was just kind of like, well, I'm gonna go with like a color palette that socially and culturally is sort of thought of as soft. And so I was like, well, I'm gonna go with like pinks and pastels. And I sort of wanted to move beyond, like I wanted to make something that felt very in the moment and very much in the present. And I wanted to sort of think about, could Blackness exist alongside other palettes? So like culturally and socially, could they ever coexist together? And so in my earlier work, I think I was interested in that, like, well, it's 2012. Like if I had to color Blackness, how would I color it and what would that look like? And so I just started playing with different palettes that were interesting to me. I also started to look at the materials that I was photographing and started using the palettes in those items to sort of create the stage for like the little still lifes I was making. So you'll see, you know, like I'm completely like Diana Ross and like Melba Moore and the Free album, and like looking at all these 1960s, 70s, 80s diva icons and looking at the design and color that went into like making Black girl magic marketable and cool in like these early decades. And so I kind of started to pull from my materials and letting those materials inform the way I made my images. And so I use like Color Aid and seamless paper, and I use fabric of different textures as like backdrops. And I really just would kind of play around and limit my palette based on my objects. So I kind of let the objects sort of set the stage for how I'm sort of creating my sets. And you know, and now I think at this point, because I've done a lot of work with like rich pinks and yellows and browns, and you know, thinking about like how those colors are sort of like, they could be, you know, home wall painted decor. And so I think at this point I'm sort of, my palette always is sort of shifting a little bit. I feel like now I'm using a lot more like browns and like warmer tones. The next series that I want to make, I think it's going to be more like turquoises and pinks, and so, but like having like some like browns mixed in with that. So I think it's just kind of like a little bit of looking at the objects I have, but then thinking about what directions I kind of want to go in next. But a lot of it is inspired by the materials themselves and the social significance and cultural significance of color. Yeah.
Cool.
And I also just like to look at things that make me feel good. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like thinking about joy and self-care. And I like, it's really important to me that while like my work could be like, it does come from a place, I think, and I know people don't often think about that, but like when I was making these series or when I'm making this work, for me, it's also, it does something for me. Like I don't know how to describe how making this work is like healing for me, and like a way of like recovering from maybe I had a bad week, or maybe I'm having a bad year, or whatever it is, but like the work is sort of like recovery for me. And so I think that also is something that I don't talk about often, but it does sort of inform the color choices, and like thinking about like the emotional effect of these very simple choices, like how they can affect you and impact you. So yeah.
That's wow. Like I think that's really awesome that you close with that, because I think living in 2020 like we often take for granted self-care, and you know, and I think it's, and I'm glad that you recognize that, you know, what you create, you also want to enjoy looking at, and you want to enjoy creating, and I think a lot of people are take that for granted, and you know, I feel like 2020 has reminded them that let's look at things and you know, care for things and care for themselves that, you know, we enjoy.
Yeah.
And so I want to conclude with this one last question, bringing us home to honor your exhibition and at the Davis Gallery, Better Than Good, Black Hair and the Art of Nakeya Brown. And, you know, and so another student, Faith Bay, at HWS, we both kind of went back and forth of, you know, what should we name this exhibition, and, you know, how can we best represent and honor your work and also kind of, you know, get the crowd thinking. And so we came up with, you know, Better Than Good. We read it, I was reading a book, Hair Stories, by two amazing authors that I sadly can't think of their names right now.
Ayana Bird and Lori.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, 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 and yes,
That
and
was actually like a really important book.
it's
Well, for
really,
me too, yes.
yeah,
So
yeah, it's, yeah. And so we were influenced by that work, and they brought up good hair, and so we wanted to like play around with this idea of like, you know, good hair, and like, you know, but it's like we're better than this idea, like better than good hair as well. And so I guess I wanted to conclude with this question of, you know, and I'm still, even if you don't have an answer for it, because I'm still trying to figure out, you know, what does my hair mean to me for it to be better than good hair? And I guess, and your work is allowing me to explore this as well in this question. So I guess I wanted to conclude with, you know, what does better than good mean to you or feel to you? Yeah.
I definitely appreciate the way it's about recontextualizing, you know, and unlearning, right? A lot of some of the harmful ideas that have been sort of funneled and circulating within our community. And I think, you know, when I hear better than good, I really hear sort of like, at a most basic sense, is just like simple affirmation, like affirming that you are enough, and however you move and decide to present, like that is enough. And so I just honestly, I think better than good is just sort of like this gateway to help people to be open and be open to like unlearning some of the ideas that we still carry around about like hair texture, or, you know, skin color, body size, gender identity, like however we think that we're supposed to be. It's like it gives us room to think beyond that. And you know, I love the title, because I do think the title has like historical references that sort of allow us to take a minute to see, well, where's the source of some of these things, some of these ideas that we have about, you know, body politics. And yeah, I think it's just a opportunity to learn something new, right?
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Nakeya.
Thank you.
Taking the time out of your busy schedule and talking with me. It's amazing. And what you're doing is amazing. So yeah, thank you.